So a couple of days ago, Scott Manley was making a Q&A video and one of his viewers asked him how you optimize a gravity turn. If you don't know what a gravity turn is, it's how you get into space when you're launching a rocket. You've probably seen these long exposures of a rocket going up and then turning, and it arcs over and it goes horizontal. If you want to know why rockets go horizontal, you should check out Scott Manley's tutorials on how to play KSB, or you can check out my video on how satellites stay in orbit. But back to the question, someone was asking how you optimize the gravity turn. He said it was interesting, he wanted to do a video on it, but I also was immediately interested and wanted to do my own video, not the same as Scott's video where he's going to do research and talk about all of the things you consider in industry when you're designing a launch profile for a rocket. I just wanted to see what my brand new engineering degree, which I don't have the diploma for yet, and some MATLAB could do without me doing all that research and seeing what they do in industry. I just wanted to give it a shot. Yeah, but this kept getting more and more complicated. The first thing you run into is drag. Density changes as you go up. It decreases. MATLAB actually helps a lot with this. It has a standard atmosphere model built in, and you can get the density from that, and that works all the way up to 20 kilometers where the density gets locked at a single value. This is not physically realistic, so I just linearly cut that value off. It's not super realistic, but oh god, it's going to get worse from here. Another thing you have to consider is the coefficient of drag. This describes how draggy an object is. I've talked about this in like my last 3 videos, but essentially there's some value and you multiply this equation by it, and that tells you the drag force. The problem is the coefficient of drag is not constant. It goes up around Mach 1 and falls off from there. I kind of threw this out and just kept it a constant value. That means my drag is now overestimated, but my density is underestimated for super high altitudes. I don't know. Really, this is just too much work to get all of that aero model in there. I just went with standard drag and assumed that it would kind of die off once I reached higher altitudes. I don't know if that's realistic or not. But of course, we're also doing a gravity turn, so we're going to be moving up and turning the rocket and sort of wait one sec. Yeah, so we're going to be like power sliding our rocket like this, so the area exposed changes and so does the coefficient of drag. You can see if we're going straight on, it's just a circle, low area, and low drag because it's streamlined. But if we're flying like this, there's more area and a higher coefficient of drag. So what I did is I just transformed a sine function. So when it's flying 90 degrees, it is a cylinder, which is as long as the rocket. And when it's flying head on, it is a circle that's as wide as the diameter of the rocket. And by the way, I forgot to mention this, I'm using the Saturn 1B launch vehicle because it's a nice, simple 2-stage vehicle. Unlike the Falcon 9, it doesn't have to worry about saving fuel to land, and unlike Rocket Lab, it's not dumping batteries. This is a simple rocket. It also didn't hurt that there's this 443-page report from NASA, which I did not print or read, but Wikipedia summarized all of the mass information I needed to build my simulation. The next problem I ran into in my simulation is that the Earth is round. I built the initial version with a flat Earth model, but this doesn't really work when you're going to orbit. The curvature of the Earth is what lets you get into an orbit, so our gravity drag would be overestimated if we didn't take into account ignore all of that stuff I just said. The Earth has to be round. I fixed it. Here's some cell phone picture of me testing an orbit. It went around multiple times. It was stable. It aligned with the two-body problem. I think my simulation is accurate. And there's one more source of error for this. In my simulation, you just fly to altitude. You don't actually have to reach orbit. And I just assume that when you reach altitude, you keep burning until your orbit is circularized. This is a bit of an oversight on my part. I was assuming that there would be a small impulsive maneuver, which just means instantaneous. However, over 50% of the delta V you use is to circularize, at least for my launch profiles. So I'm ignoring a fair bit of gravity drag that in reality I should be taking into account, but it's good enough for a YouTube video. So then I had to come up with some strategies for how I'd actually do my gravity turn, because I have to optimize something. Initially I was thinking of something geometric, like the square root of x function, or maybe a bunch of circles patched together with increasing radii to make it look sort of like an exponential curve. But really, I just ended up simplifying it and waiting till a certain altitude, and then pitching at a constant rate. This is not realistic to how you do this in industry because you might want to hold at 45 degrees for a while, or maybe pitch slower with your first stage if you have a really low thrust second stage. There's way more to consider. I just threw this at it and optimized for the best height and the best pitch rate. Okay, so that's the story of the simulation. It's a nightmare. It took me hours to do. What are the results? Well, after running 10,000 combinations of different heights and pitch rates, which is not the best way to do this, but I sort of just brute forced it, I found out that your best starting height is 677 meters, and your best pitch rate is 0.3687 degrees per second. And that only uses about 12% more delta V than the rocket actually has. So what's going on here? I wasn't expecting this to be optimized really because it's just blindly turning at a constant rate, but I was expecting it to be closer to something that was physically possible with the Saturn 1B. Well, it turns out I forgot to include the rotation of the Earth. Unfortunately, you can't just subtract the speed of the Earth's surface from your delta V because you're starting out with some horizontal velocity. There's less gravity pulling you down effectively. So it's a completely different problem. I had to start over, add an initial velocity, but also account for the wind because the air has to be moving at the same speed as the Earth, and that also changes with altitude. But eventually, once I found my missing parentheses, I was able to get that working and had another simulation results, which took another 18 minutes, another 10,000 calculations, and your starting height was at 1 kilometer. For reference, my upper bound I'd set at 1 kilometer because I figured that was way too high. The fact that the upper bound was the optimum choice meant that it was actually probably beyond that. So I increased it to 2 kilometers, ran it again, another 18-minute calculation later, I found out that the starting height for the best launch profile I can get with my really dumb strategy starts at 1,152 meters, which is higher than I expected, but okay. And then you want a pitch rate of 0.4242 degrees per second. And it still used 6% more delta V than the rocket has, which at this point I'm just going to accept. I have way too much drag because, like I said, I'm not decreasing my coefficient of drag with Mach number, but also I'm just using the worst strategy to actually get into space. So the fact that it's almost possible, it's pretty good. But anyway, hopefully you found this somewhat interesting and entertaining. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for Scott's video so I can learn how to do this correctly. And maybe I'll do a second pass at it. Who knows? I'm Con Hathing, and I'll see you in the next video.